So, the thing is this. The practice of meditation as it is being taught here and as it is understood here is that meditation is an opportunity to pay attention to the truth. It's an opportunity, especially in terms of this method, which is called a non-dual method, or Advaita, is a method in which we're using meditation to turn our attention back to its source. We're using meditation to turn our attention and look at where our attention is coming from, right? It's called the direct path. So we're using meditation to have a direct path to see ourselves, to realize ourselves, so that we can be ourselves. And obviously, if I'm saying that, what I'm also saying is that most of humanity is not being who they are. Most of humanity is being who they were taught they were, who their parents said they were, who the schools said they were, who the society said they were. And they learn to be a person. They learn to identify with the physical body, and they learn to live in the world of people who are separate from one another, who are all trying to be happy, who are all trying to feel secure, who are all trying to have a good life, who are all trying to experience a sense of peace and well-being. And so that's the world as we know it. That's the world of people who have learned to be a person, live in a world of people, separate from other people, separate from life. And then we're doing our best to be happy. And in that world, the way things occur and the way everybody understands reality is that the way to be happy is you do what it takes to be happy. You do your job. You be a good father. You be a good mother. You be a good husband. You be a good person. You work hard. You earn money so that you can buy security and you can buy pleasures and avoid suffering and avoid pain. This is the game of life for humanity, right? And for most of humanity, that's it. That's the whole story, right? And so when you look around you, when you watch the news, when you watch movies, when you talk to people, that's the conversation of life. That's the conversation for living that's going on in the world. We're all talking about how to get ahead, how to stay, how to be secure, how to be healthy, how to eat right, how to get your relationships to work, right? How to avoid depression and anxiety, how to avoid addiction, how to avoid death, how to survive, how to avoid sickness and illness, all of that. And the way that it's being done in the world that we live in is to be in control as much as possible. And money and being in control are associated with one another. And so we keep doing this, and we keep striving to reach goals. And we keep looking forward to the future, as the possibility of getting what I want in my life, the possibility of finally being happy, the possibility of finally being able to be at ease and relaxed and enjoy my life. And this is a process that it goes unnoticed unless you step back and look at it, that the way it goes for people is when you're a child, you look forward to being a teenager. When you're a teenager, you look forward to being an adult. When you're an adult, you look forward to, having the things that everybody's chasing after in life. A nice house, a family, a good job, looking good, to look good, to get the right stuff, to be the right way. And then you get in the middle of life, right, when people have a crisis, because they're starting to realize that this isn't quite working well, right? So there's this crisis that comes up. I'm right in the middle now. I've done all these things to succeed. I've done all these things to be happy. And that, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that's worked that well. And now I'm going into another phase of life in which the decline will begin, right? My hair will start to fall out. My hair will start to become gray. My body will start to get wrinkled. I will start to be more susceptible to colon cancer. I'll be more susceptible to the things that happen to people as they get later in life. And then from there, it'll go downhill further, right? So there's this crisis of like getting my shit together. There's this crisis about, you know, is there something that I forgot to do? Is there something that I should do that I haven't done yet that will really get me where I want to be in my life, and so forth. So that goes on for a while. And then that turns into what is commonly known as a resignation. You know, after the midlife crisis, you realize that no matter what you did in that midlife crisis, whether you got the new sports car, whether you got the face job, you know, whether you got a bigger, better house, etc., that you still find yourself being anxious. You still find yourself not necessarily at ease in your life. And before you know it, you're 60, 65, you're on Medicare, right? The body's has further fallen apart. And then the final looking forward for most people is retirement, right? Everything I did in my life, I promised things that would make me happy and be at ease and be secure and be satisfied and be content and be at peace. None of it really worked. I mean, yeah, temporarily things, you know, when I got that new car, it was great for a while. When I got that new relationship, it was great for a while. But nothing ever really lasted, right? But retirement, this is what people get around the water cooler and the coffee to talk about at work, right? How much time? I remember when I worked in my career, you know, when you get further on in your career and you get together with other people that have been in that career for a while, it's inevitable that what comes up is how much time you got left before you can retire, you know? And then you do the figuring, you know, how much money will I have when I retire, get my Social Security, or get my pension if you're fortunate to have a pension or whatever it is, right? And you're looking forward to that. That's the big final look forward, right? And then you retire, right? And then you retire. And gradually it starts to set in that there's nothing to look forward to now. The next thing is death. Of course, you're not going to look forward to that, right? And so now it starts to set in. There's nothing to look forward to now. And if I'm fortunate enough to have the security and to have the money and have the free time to do what I want, right? And then I start to experience that being able to do what I want, I'm not even sure what that is. I'm not even sure what I want to do. You know, I wake up in the morning and not having to go to work anymore starts to become a problem because my life doesn't seem meaningful anymore. There's nothing to achieve. I miss my friends. You know, and so if you go across the street from here, there's a lot of these, you know, baby boomer retirement places in this area, right? If you want to find out what retirement looks like, take a walk through there and look at these people staring at the walls, right? So this is an important thing to understand before it's too late, right? Because this business of meditation and these teachings are really about the possibility that it doesn't have to go like that. Really about the possibility that there's something that has been missed, something that has been mistaken early on in the process about who you are. And it may be the case that who you think you are, who they said you were, who you learned to be, isn't necessarily the whole story, and maybe even is not necessarily the truth at all. And this is where in the East, in the teachings from mystic Christianity, in mystic Judaism, and Sufism, and Buddhism, and Taoism, they talk about this concept of enlightenment. And they say enlightenment means to wake up. The Buddha, the word Buddha means the awakened one. To wake up. To wake up from what? To wake up from being in the sleep of thinking that you know who you are, and in the sleep of thinking that you know what's real and you know reality as it is and you know how to live your life. To wake up from the dream of that. This is what the word enlightenment means, to wake up and discover the truth, the truth that passes understanding, the truth that will set you free. And so people get interested in this and they start reading books about it. You know, Alan Watts was a famous person who brought a lot of these teachings from the East to the West back in the 70s. And people read books about enlightenment, about Zen Buddhism, meditation, you know, practicing Tai Chi, yoga, you know, and they start to learn about this business of being enlightened, this possibility of waking up and realizing a way of experiencing your life in which you actually feel peace, a way of experiencing your life in which you actually are happy. And even though you get older and your hair falls out and you have to face your mortality, that you're happy. All the way to the end, you're happy. And you can accept life for what it is. You're not afraid to die. You're content, you're satisfied. This is what they promise in terms of what this business of enlightenment is, right? And so people take the time to read books like books that were written more contemporary books that were written by Eckhart Tolle, or there's a bunch of people out there that Muji is a popular teacher these days. Rupert Spira is a popular teacher these days. There's a bunch of them. You can go on YouTube and they'll pop right up if you put in enlightenment or meditation. And they read these books, and these books present these concepts about enlightenment and describe in more detail the possibility of enlightenment and what it is and how it works and how meditation fits into it and so forth and so on. And so people become spiritually intelligent. So they can go to parties now and talk about enlightenment, you know, and talk about Zen and be hip and be able to understand these concepts. So the first step is these concepts that are talked about that come from these ancient traditions that involve meditation and the understanding of these concepts. That's the first phase. And a lot of people don't get past the first phase. A lot of people think, well, this is cool and hip to understand these things, and I can talk about these things, and I'll be a spiritual person now, and I'll go to yoga classes and meditation classes and read these books. But that's about it. It really doesn't make much of a difference in their life. Then the next phase is that if you recognize that what's being spoken about here is actually real and could actually be the difference in your life, that you don't have to be addicted to pain medication, you don't have to be addicted to pot, you don't have to be addicted to alcohol, you don't have to be addicted to television, you don't have to be neurotic, you don't have to suffer depression and anxiety, that it is actually possible to get free from all that, and you realize that that's what these concepts are talking about. And then the next step comes where you spend more time deepening your understanding of the concepts, because now you're motivated to get the results that they promise to produce. So that's the next phase. And if you continue in that phase and the understandings get deeper of these concepts, then the next phase is the phase that they call in Buddhism the Great Doubt. The Great Doubt. Because these concepts speak about an understanding of reality that is so radically different from the ordinary way that people see things, and an understanding of who you are that's so radically different than who you thought you were, that as you deepen the understanding, the natural process is the mind begins to come up with yes, but. You people who have been in class, right, you've experienced this? Because you've said yes, but, haven't you, right? So the mind comes up with you, well, what about this, and what about that, and you know, but this, that doesn't make any sense, and you know. So you go through this doubting process, right? And that doubting process can be the end of it too, because a lot of people just can't get beyond that. They just feel like this doesn't make sense, it doesn't fit my ordinary way of functioning, it doesn't fit the way most people are living their lives, and so I just don't accept it, I don't consider it to be true. I think this is a cult. I think these people are navel gazers. I think that they're just wasting their time with all this meditation and these traditional teachings that they spend their time learning about. But if it doesn't end, and through that process of going through doubt, you ask questions and you get answers, and the answers dissolve your doubts, you get to a point that's called conviction, right? And when you get to the point of conviction, it's now I'm convinced. I don't have any doubt anymore. I've gone through that process. I'm convinced that I am who these teachings say I am, that I am awareness itself. I am not my physical body. I am not my psychological self. I am not the name they gave me. I'm not the person that they told me I was. I am the awareness that was here before I learned any of that. That's the truth. I am awareness itself. And as the teachings teach, when I know myself as that and when I experience myself as that, my life is a different life. That awareness never changes. It's completely stable. That awareness is never affected by any of the things that happen circumstantially in my life. And that awareness is not physical. And that's maybe the most radical quality about it, right? Because if it's not physical, then all that pertains to that which is physical doesn't pertain to this awareness. Which means, and this is the big one, this is what Jesus Christ said when he was teaching this stuff. He said, I offer you everlasting life. What's that mean? He's simply saying, if it's true that what you are is not physical, then it must be true that what you are doesn't die, because what you are that dies is physical. It's the body. So if you start to buy into this stuff, and if you start to listen to these concepts, and you start to see what they're pointing to, and you start to realize that, well, maybe this is true, maybe this is true, and if it's really true, then enlightenment is true, and it's possible for me to get free and be happy and satisfied and content and have peace of mind. And so now you have the conviction about it. And after the conviction comes the next step. The next step is, I understand these things, I'm continuing to deepen that understanding, I'm convinced that these things are true, but I am not experiencing my life that way. I am not having the experience of being enlightened. How do I have the experience of being enlightened? And this describes the spiritual seeker. Right? The spiritual seeker is motivated to seek the experience of enlightenment because they understand the concepts thoroughly enough, and they may be even thoroughly convinced enough to go to India or to spend thousands of dollars going to these retreats that these spiritual teachers are providing. And this can go on for the rest of your life. Right? Because one of the things that happens is that unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the spiritual business these days, which is $1 billion business now, right? Who will keep this process going of you being a seeker, you know, by telling you, no, you have to meditate more. That if you meditate more, that'll get you there, right? Or you have to learn more. You have to read more books. You have to come to more retreats. You have to do more, different, and better. And if you keep that up long enough, the miracle will happen. This is the big spiritual game, you know. If you keep that up long enough, the miracle will happen. You'll be blessed. It'll happen to you like it did with Eckhart Tolle. All of a sudden one day, the bubble will burst, you'll be enlightened, you'll start to experience bliss, there'll be no more suffering, and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. That's the bullshit commercial product for spiritual teaching, right? However, in the East and in many of the teaching traditions that talked about this, that's not the way it was presented. There is a specific process that can be gone through that will bring you to this experience. It's not an overnight thing. It's not something that will happen like a blessing from heaven. That happens. It happened for Eckhart Tolle. It's happened for other people. But these are extremely unusual cases. And so it's not realistic for you to expect that to be the case for you. The more likely thing in the case that is more possible is a gradual process of awakening, using meditation, using deepening your understanding of the concepts, right? And then learning how to begin to apply these concepts in real everyday life situations to be able to come out of the dream, to come out of the trance, to come out of the conditioning, to change your brain, and start to live a life in which you are actually experiencing the freedom, the peace, and the happiness that's available. So one of the things that I've been focused on in this class over time is what is it? You know, what is that process? You know, how can you guide people and support people in going through a process that will end them up with the result that they are interested in experiencing, right? And so recently I've been talking about that in a lot more detail, right? When I have talked about the idea of free will, I've talked about the idea of determination, right? Those are two of the most difficult concepts for people to swallow. And yet those two concepts are very much at the heart of the matter of what will free you from being stuck in the idea that you're a limited person and the world as you see it is the real world. And so therefore it's worthwhile to go into those things and to deal with those things in spite of the difficulty of accepting them, because if you do begin to see the truth of those things, and you are able to allow yourself to experience what it would be like to let go of the illusion that you have free will, and to allow yourself to experience what it would be like to let go of the illusion that the future is not already determined, then you may begin to have periods of experience in which you do experience what it's like to be free and to have the peace of mind and the happiness that's available. However, in order for that to be the case, there has to be practice. There has to be a practice. And the purpose of the practice, whether we're talking about formal meditation or informal meditation, is to practice being what you really are, because you've been practicing being what you're not all these years. And therefore your brain is completely conditioned to believe that you are the name you were given, you are a physical body, you are a personality, and everything else that you see in the world is given from that you're separate from other people, that you live in time. And so in order to get to a different experience, you have to practice the same way you practice being who you think you are, you have to practice who you really are. And you have to practice it with as much consistency as you practice being who you think you are. When you were a little kid and they gave you your name, these are things you don't really remember, but it's true. When they gave you your name, when you first heard your name the first time, right? You had to have people tell you your name again and again, didn't you? For you to know your name, right? Until the time came when that was no longer something anybody had to tell you, because it was totally integrated into your brain in such a way that now I know who I am. I know my name. I don't have to think about it to remember my name anymore, right? The same thing is true with everything else. You learned where you lived. You learned when you were a kid. There was a time when you were a kid when you were afraid to leave, go too far away from your home without your parent, because you'd be afraid you wouldn't be able to find your way back. This is true, right? But then the time came when you knew where you lived and you knew that you could find your way back, and then you didn't think about it anymore and you weren't afraid. And it goes on and on and on like that. You keep building a world in which you now believe you know what the world is, what's real, you know who you are, you know how it works, like that. Until it gets completely there, and now you're completely conditioned and you're in the world as a person with other people in the world, and you're in the game of life. Right? So, to undo all that, because in the teachings that I'm speaking of here, that's the source of your suffering. The source of your suffering is that you're not who you think you are, and reality isn't what you think it is, and that's why you're suffering. That's what the traditions teach. And so the concepts that you learn in the beginning are the concepts that explain how that's the case. What is real if what you thought was real isn't real? Who am I if I'm not who I thought I was? These are what the concepts talk about, right? And if you study the concepts in these teachings, you start to see, you start to see the obvious. You start to see the obvious. Because if I say to you, who are you? Right? And this is interesting that most people live out their entire life without ever entertaining this question with any degree of seriousness. If I say to you, who are you? You can only answer me in certain ways. You can only answer me in certain ways. You can tell me your name, you can tell me the roles you play in your life, you can say I'm this physical body, you know. You can only answer that way, right? However, if you look And if I ask you a simple question, which is, are you aware? Are you aware? And you answer that question, the answer will be what? Yeah. It'll be yes, right? Because that's a stupid question, right? There's nothing more obvious than that you're aware, right? And yet that fact of your awareness has been almost completely ignored for your entire life. Are you aware? That's a stupid question. What do you mean, am I aware? Of course I'm aware, right? Right? When you were a baby, that awareness was what you were, not what you had. When you were a baby, that awareness was what you were, not what you had. The baby is the awareness. It hasn't yet learned to be a person who is aware. When you learn to be a person who is aware, the awareness is meaningless, right? Because now you're in the world of a person and you're in the world of the reality of the person, right? The awareness is there all along, but now it's ignored. That's called ignorance. Now it's ignored, right? And yet, if you stop and look at it and you pay attention and you listen and you look to see what the obvious truth is, it must be the case that that awareness is the fact of your existence. It is what you are. Because if that's not there, are you here? If the awareness isn't there, do you exist?
No.
See, you can be a person who gets a head injury and has total amnesia, right? Then you don't know who you are, right? But you still exist. The awareness is still here. Well, then it must be true that the awareness is here first, and then you learn that you're a person. But then you forget that you're the awareness and become the person. And that's the beginning of suffering.
Is it an object, awareness?
No. No. Awareness is not an object. An object is something that can be seen by the subject, right? An object is something that can be seen by the subject, right? So awareness can't be seen. You can't see awareness. This is one of the reasons why it's easy to ignore it, right? Because you can't see it. You know why you can't see it?
Because you are.
Because you are it. You can't get away from it to see it because you're it. As St. Francis of Assisi said, what you are looking for is what's looking. So if you want to know who you are, you can never find out who you are by searching for it as if it's an object that you can see. The only way you can know who you are is to discover that you are what's looking for who you are. You are what's looking for who you are. And the only way you can know yourself is to be that, because you can never see that. And yet you are that, and you have always been that, and you can never be anything but that. And when you're trying to be something other than that, you will suffer.
What was the statement about the presupposed self? And
The what?
the presupposed self searching.
Oh yeah, well that's the statement from Ramana Maharshi, the famous statement, right? There is a presupposed non-existent self. This is the whole teaching, by the way. There is a presupposed non-existent self that seeks freedom, seeks liberation for that non-existent self. There's a presupposed non-existent self seeking liberation for that non-existent self. So in the beginning, when you hear these teachings, you hear it as the person who you think you are, and then as the person who you think you are, you say, oh, this sounds good. I want that.
Just a paradox for the human mind.
Yeah, this sounds good. I want that, right? But who wants it? Who wants it is the non-existent self. Who wants it is who you really aren't. So who you really aren't, trying to be who you really are, can't happen. So these are the twists and turns in terms of this process of awakening, right? But nonetheless, it is possible, and the possibility of realizing it depends upon your having guidance. Because if you try and do this on your own, you'll be lost in the sauce very soon, as some of you know. right? And that's just part of the process. In the beginning, confusion is there, right? In the beginning, these things are confusing. These things seem difficult to understand, right? But nonetheless, if you stay in the process and if you have guidance and you use meditation in the way it's meant to be used, you can get to a place where these things become natural, where you're being who you really are naturally instead of who you thought you were. And then you get the fruit, and then you experience happiness and peace and well-being. Yeah.
At the moment of death, a lot of people experience that because they don't have a choice.
That's right.
At the very end, you see our eyes go wide open.
That's right. Almost everybody at the moment of death realizes what I'm talking about. The only problem is it's a little late in the game, right? It's a little late in the game to realize who you really are when the lights are about to go out, right? That's why these teachings are important, to get these teachings as soon as possible, to practice these practices as soon as possible, right? So you can wake up and experience life as it really is and before you die, so that when death comes, you'll be prepared, you won't be afraid, you'll know the truth, you know who you are, you'll be satisfied, and you'll know that you've actually been here and lived your life, right? And if that doesn't happen, this is the bad news. If that doesn't happen, I hate to say, but it's true, if that doesn't happen, you were never even here. You were never even here. What was here was a ghost. What was here is this imaginary thing you thought was you, living an imaginary life that wasn't real. So you never lived. You never actually lived. That's actually important to get, because if you really get that, then there will be nothing more important to you than to come to these understandings and realize the truth. Nothing more important than that. And you'll need that kind of motivation to deal with what there is to deal with. You'll need that motivation to deal with what there is to deal with, because what there is to deal with is completely reprogramming your brain. And that's no easy feat. You've been practicing 24/7 that was reality. Any questions?
That laugh just reminds me, I got told that it was laughs to himself.
Well, you gotta laugh. Anybody that sees this for what it is, you gotta laugh, because it's a bad joke. It's a bad joke. It's not a bad joke for the people that have woken up and realized the truth, right? But when you're talking to people who are still sleeping, right? It's a bad joke. It's a bad joke. So today I really wanted to get into talking in more detail about this process of how do you live it. You know, how do you actually experience that, right? And there are things that can be said about that do work, that you can do. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of classes. So be here or be square.
When you say things you can do, you said that we're not a doer, so.
That's right. Things that you think you're doing. Things that you'll think you can do, right? But you see, if you come to the true understanding about reality and you realize that it's not, this is what I was talking to Bob about earlier, right? When you come to the reality of the way things actually are, it's not a problem that you think you're the doer. You have to think you're the doer, right? But that's not a problem when you understand it's not true. It's the understanding that provides the peace. And yet, even with the understanding, you must continue to operate as if you can do, because in the world of time and space and in the world of people, doing is part of that reality. It's an illusion, but nonetheless, it's a real illusion. All right. Have a good night.